Howdy explorers, and welcome to Movie Safari. For our very first episode, I won't be going to the jungles or far-off deserts or mountains. I will be going underwater with Finding Nemo. Finding Nemo. It's honestly one of Pixar's greatest movies. Finding Nemo is not only a fantastic film about family, parenthood, but it's also a great introduction for children and people of all ages into the underwater world and marine biology. It's very clear that the writers and filmmakers did a lot of research, a lot of homework, in order to make sure that the underwater world they portrayed was accurate to real life. But they still made a few mistakes, and in this series, I'm going to look at them. Now, this isn't going to be a criticism of the film as a whole. This also isn't going to be just nitpicking for the sake of nitpicking. Film is a very important way for people to experience the world around them, and a lot of people form their outlook based on the images they see. Film, in general, has a history of not always portraying the animal world in an accurate way. So as a result, a lot of misinformation and misconceptions can be spread. So what I'm going to do in this series is talk about the many ways animals and zoology has been portrayed in film, and talk about how accurate it is to real life, and also how the real animals are in the wild. Alright, so I'm just going to make a disclaimer here and say that I'm not going to be criticizing the anthropomorphizing or giving of human traits to animals in this film, mostly because it is a kid's film and they wouldn't really have a story if the animals didn't behave a little bit like humans. So any amount of parental protection or social interaction, all that kind of stuff I'm not going to address. This is mostly just going to be the actual biology of the animals.
Wow.
Yes, Marlin, I see it. It's beautiful. A lot of other clownfish had their eyes on this place.
You better believe they did. Every single one of them.
Mm-hmm.
Alright, so first off, we're off to a good start. Marlin and coral, two clownfish, specifically Ocellaris clownfish, or clown anemone fish, are portrayed living in an anemone. And that is something that, is probably one of the most defining traits of clownfish. It's called mutualism, in which both animals, the anemone and the clownfish, benefit equally from their partnership. The clownfish receives protection via the anemone's stinging tentacles, and the anemone gets a little bit of food from the droppings and leavings that clownfish leave behind as they eat. Alright, here's another good fact. The way they portray this barracuda is actually pretty accurate. Barracudas are surface predators. They float almost motionless towards the surface. So you can see this guy is very high up. What they do is they basically use their eyesight to watch for any kind of sudden movement, which is why when you see coral dash down for her eggs, that's what triggers the barracuda's attack. Now, it seems like a weird strategy, but actually the scales of the barracuda are very reflective, and as a result, this almost makes them invisible, blending in with the surrounding water. Now, a barracuda, if it was particularly hungry, would go after something as small as a clownfish, but it wouldn't eat the eggs. Their method of killing prey is to basically ram it and use their sharp teeth to slice their prey in half, and they wouldn't scrape off fish eggs from a rock or a rock crevice. I mean, I guess you could say that another fish came by and ate the eggs, but, they never say. The eggs just kind of disappear.
Do you want this anemone to sting you?
Yes.
Brush.
Okay, I'm done.
Alright, here's another good fact. Clownfish do actually brush up intentionally against the anemone tentacles in order to boost their immunity. The way clownfish survive anemone stings is they are covered in a special mucus. Most fish have a mucus over their skin in some degree, but clownfish have a very special mucus, and as a result, the clownfish is virtually unharmed. So in order to help replenish their body's coating of mucus, they brush up against the anemone, and that abrasion basically sort of triggers the production of the mucus that coats their whole body.
Let's name the zones, the zones, the zones. Let's name the zones of the open sea.
Mr. Ray! Come on, Nemo!
Oh, you better stay with me.
Epipelagic, mesopelagic, bathyal, abyssopelagic. All the rest are too deep for you and me to see.
Alright, let's talk about Mr. Ray's songs. Now, obviously, spotted eagle rays don't teach classes to smaller fish in real life, But aside from that, this Ray does seem to have a pretty good grasp on the ocean. Let's name the zones of the open sea. He actually got them all perfectly right. Epipelagic, that's the light penetrating zone at the very top. That's basically anywhere you go swimming in the ocean. If you're swimming at the beach or if you're diving, the area where you are, where you can see everything, where light penetrates, that's epipelagic. The mesopelagic is below the epipelagic, and it's what's called the twilight zone, where light is still penetrating, you can still see, but it's very dim, very dark. That's sort of the transition zone between the pitch black, dark areas and then the lighter areas where we usually associate with the ocean. Then below the mesopelagic is the bathyal, also said by Mr. Ray. That is the true midnight zone. That's where it's almost pitch black, and then even farther below that is abyssal. And abyssal is usually deep sea trenches, deep sea canyons, and wherever there's hydrothermal vents, tube worms.
Oh, let's name a species, a species, a species. Let's name a species that live in the sea. Hydrozoa, gastropoda, arthropoda, echinoderma, tucada, chordata, and some fish-looking on me.
As for Mr. Ray's other song, Let's Name the Species, it's both accurate and inaccurate. So all the things he mentions are actual scientific taxonomic terms. But the problem is none of them are species. So for those of you who don't know taxonomic hierarchy, there's domain, which is the biggest, like eukarya. Everything with a nucleus in the cell is eukarya. That's a domain. Then kingdom, animals. Animals are a kingdom, Animalia. Then phylum. That's how big phylum is. It is the third largest. And then class is below phylum, mammals, Mammalia, that's a class. Below class is order, then family, then genus, then species, and then subspecies if you want to get really specific. Porifera is a phylum, that's sponges. Coelenterata is a group consisting of 2 phyla. I'm reading this. Hydrozoa, Cyphozoa, and Anthozoa are all classes within the greater phylum of Cnidaria. Stenophora is another phylum, that is comb jellies. Bryozoa is another phylum. Gastropoda is a class of mollusks. It consists of snails and slugs. Arthropoda, arthropods, are another phylum. That's insects, crustaceans, and arachnids. And then Echinoderma is actually a genus of fungi, but I think what he's talking about is Echinodermata, which is another phylum that is sea stars and urchins and sand dollars. Everything with a spinal cord, chordata, that's a phylum.
Hear me?
Let's talk about diving. I've been diving for about 5-6 years now, so I'm not a master, but I know my way around diving. And I will say that when it comes to messing with the marine life, the laws are very strict. One of the big things is touching and or taking animals. That is a big no-no, because coral reefs are such a very delicate and sensitive environment, and they're subject to a lot of deterioration because of human activity. The laws are incredibly strict. Now, the Great Barrier Reef has a lot of complex laws and regulations that I don't really have the time to go into right now, but I will say that generally, taking fish is frowned upon there. Usually if you're permitted to take fish, you're either part of a scientific or otherwise conservation-based organization, and this guy's a dentist. So I'm gonna guess no. And why is it always dentists doing like crappy things to the environment, you know? The dentist later says this.
Beauty, isn't he? I found that guy struggling for life out in the reef, and I saved him.
But I think it's pretty non-controversial to say that even if you think a fish or an animal is in danger, usually it isn't, unless it's, you know, literally tangled in a net or some other, you know, in danger because of some human intervention. Just because a fish is a couple yards away from the reef where it usually isn't, but is still perfectly capable of getting in that situation, that doesn't mean it's in trouble. So this guy broke both legal rules and ethical rules because he literally just stole a fish from a protected marine area.
I am a nice shark, not a mindless eating machine. If I am to change this image, I must first change myself. Fish are friends, not food.
Alright, time for the sharks. Bruce, Chum, and Anchor are a great white, a mako shark, and then a greater hammerhead shark. All these are indeed found off the coast of Australia. But the funny thing is that this is some sort of Alcoholics Anonymous type meeting for sharks who no longer want to eat fish. When actually, only one of the sharks is really a strict fish eater. The mako shark does have a diet of almost entirely fish. Hammerheads are fairly generalized in their diet, but they do love to eat stingrays that live at the bottom of the seafloor, and that's why they've adapted that wide hammerhead. It almost sort of serve as a metal detector to scan the bottom of the ocean for rays. And then great whites are very generalized. You know, everyone knows they love seals and sea lions, large aquatic mammals, but I mean, great whites will basically eat anything that is big enough to fit in their jaws. And I do think it's funny that the one shark that actually specializes in eating fish is the one who ate his fish buddy. So, you know, that kind of makes sense.
You aren't bleeding?
Oh.
Dory, are you okay?
Oh. That's good.
The combination of blood in the water and shark attacks is one that is permanently ingrained in our public conscious. And while just a small whiff of blood doesn't turn a shark into a mindless, entranced eating machine like it does in this movie, it does actually provoke a very strong feeding response. So, you know, that's why for shark diving trips, they will often bring big old things of chum or, you know, blood or fish oil to put in the water to provoke sharks to enter the area, to show feeding behavior. That's why it's so dangerous sometimes when you swim anywhere near like fishing docks. If you're near a fishing dock where people are cleaning or gutting fish, usually there's some kind of scavenging predators, oftentimes a shark. Even a shark that wouldn't normally target a human might be just provoked enough where it could just give a stray bite. And with sharks, even just a random stray bite can do some serious damage.
I'm from the ocean.
Ah, the ocean. The ocean! Ah! He hasn't been decontaminated yet.
Alright, so continuing on this dentist and his horrible treatment of the natural world, please never, ever, ever capture a wild animal and keep it as a pet. Not only are you taking an animal from the environment, you're removing a key component of the ecosystem, but also it's usually bad for the animals you already have, and it's bad for the animal you took. The stress of relocation from the wild into a captive environment oftentimes kills them, especially with fish and small animals. Oftentimes wild animals will have some kind of parasites or other conditions that cause them to have ill health, but also could damage the health of the animals in the environment. That's why you see these guys freaking out about how he hasn't been decontaminated. Whenever zoos do transfers or aquariums, they always put them in quarantine to monitor the health. They don't just drop them into the enclosure with the other healthy animals, because you never know what kind of pathogens or parasites or diseases it has picked up. And you know, those kind of things can't be taken care of by a cleaning shrimp just giving him a once-over, you know? So this is not just irresponsible treatment of the natural world, this is irresponsible animal husbandry and irresponsible fish keeping, and this guy just deserves whatever's coming to him by the end of this movie.
Dory.
I love to swim in.
Dory.
When you want to swim, you want
See,
to
I'm gonna
keep
get stuck now with that song. Now it's in my head.
Alright, so you can just see Marlin and Dory just casually swimming from what looks like the mesopelagic or even the epipelagic zone all the way down into the bathyal zone. In layman's terms, if you weren't paying attention earlier, where it's light to where it's dark. Now the film portrays this as just, you know, as simple as just walking down a flight of stairs, when really it is very unlikely that these fish could survive that. So these tropical reef fish, a blue tang and a clownfish, are very shallow water fish. They live where the depth is measured in tens of meters or even tens of feet. So these are very shallow water fish. They're adapted to a very low pressure environment. When you dive down, the pressure increases, not just incrementally, but exponentially. Now, fish are adapted to their specific pressure. So a fish that lives in the shallow ocean is adapted perfectly to a very low pressure environment, whereas a fish that lives down in the depths, like our anglerfish, is a very high pressure environment. The way they're adapted to these is by matching the external pressure with the internal pressure of their bodies. If there's any sort of pressure imbalance from inside and outside, you'll either see an explosion or an implosion. The famous blobfish picture that's kind of circulated on the internet. Blobfish don't really look like that. They really look like this. But since they're deep sea fish, when you reel them to the surface, that's what they look like by the time the pressure's done with them. So these fish that are adapted to a very low pressure environment, the pressure inside their bodies is very low. You put them down in the depths, and they're just going to implode. Like, they're just going to be crushed by that pressure. It's the same thing as if you put a human down there. You would just be like a tin can. If you go to the deep end of a swimming pool where the water's 10 to 12 feet and you just dive down to the bottom, you can already feel the change in pressure. You can feel how great the pressure is. Just imagine how that is 1,000 meters deep, or, you know, even 2,000. Like, going down to where it's completely pitch black, it is incredibly deep. It is incredibly high pressure. These fish are dead.
I'm feeling happy. Good feelings gone.
Yeah, so that anglerfish would kill them. Well, it makes for a very intense chase scene. In reality, an anglerfish would not just announce its presence by suddenly lighting up. What anglerfish do is they hide in the darkness with only their lure lighting up. And once the prey gets within biting distance, they just open their mouth so wide and so fast that it creates a vacuum and just sucks their prey in. But yeah, he wouldn't just stand there, show his teeth, light up all of a sudden, giving away his position, and then roar at them and then chase them. You know, that's just a very inefficient hunting method.
Ow! Dory, that's a jellyfish!
Bad squishy. Bad squishy.
Shoot, get it!
Hey, how come it didn't sting you?
It did. It's just that, hold still. I live in the anemone, and I'm used to these kind of stings. Come here.
So sea jellies, jellyfish, are in the same phylum and therefore fairly closely related to anemones and other corals. As a result, their stinging tentacles are actually functionally very similar. Obviously, there's, you know, hundreds of species of both jellyfish and anemones, but generally speaking, the stinging cells of a jellyfish are much stronger than that of an anemone. The stinging cells of a jellyfish are meant to kill prey very quickly, because a jellyfish is a very fragile bodied animal, so they want to be able to kill that prey very quickly before it either escapes or does damage to the jellyfish itself. So it is semi-feasible that a clownfish would be slightly resistant to the stings of a jellyfish, but then would eventually succumb with enough stings, which we do see happen to marlin.
Stay awake! Stay awake! Oh, stay awake!
I would also just like to point out that jellyfish stings are not electric. We see that a lot in movies, TV shows, Finding Nemo, SpongeBob, lots of things. They're not electric. How jellyfish tentacles work is they're covered in cells called nematocysts. And whenever the cells feel contact with the skin of an animal, they shoot thousands of tiny little harpoons. And each harpoon injects a very small amount of venom. So, you know, throughout the tentacle, it injects a whole lot of venom. Just these tiny little harpoons just injecting like a needle. It has nothing to do with electricity, nothing to do with getting zapped. I don't know how that's become the thing in movies and TV, but, you know, that's just how it is right now.
Hitched a ride on the Porcelain Express.
Okay. I just want to say this right now. Drains do not lead to the ocean. Alright? Storm drains might lead to a creek or a river, but toilets lead to sewage treatment plants, which are not places where fish can survive. You hear stories of kids watching Finding Nemo and then thinking that they want to free their fish by flushing them down the toilet. That just kills the fish. You know, I'm sorry, this is one thing where not only did Finding Nemo get it wrong, but they actually, you know, did more harm than good. So, yeah, never flush a fish.
Okay, Crush. Listen, I need to get to the East Australian Current.
Check it out!
Alright, this is another thing that the movie gets right. Sea turtles have been documented riding the East Australian Current as it flows south along the eastern coast of Australia, including, as we see here, green turtles. Sea turtles have been known to travel hundreds, if not thousands of miles in order to migrate to and from breeding grounds and nesting sites. Sea turtles will always return to the same nesting beach they were born in, no matter what, which is why protecting these beaches is super important for sea turtle conservation.
Little dudes are just eggs, we leave them on the beach to hatch, and then cuckoo-ca-choo, they find their way back to the big old blue.
The film does kind of acknowledge that the sea turtle will leave its eggs on the beach and then abandon them before they're even hatched. So I don't really know how Squirt would have found Crush if he never met him when he was born. there's no evidence of baby sea turtles ever meeting their parents. So, you know, this is just another, I guess, sort of anthropomorphizing they do to these animals to make it a better movie, make it easier to identify with the animals as a human.
How old are you? 150, dude, and still young.
Alright, so no one really knows the average lifespan of a sea turtle. They're obviously very hard to document throughout their entire life, but the average estimate is about 60 to 70 years. So, you know, a sea turtle would be lucky to live to 100. They're definitely not living to 150 and still young. What I think this is just getting confused with different kinds of turtles. Certain species of tortoise have been known to live over 100, over 150 years. There have been Galapagos tortoises that have been alive in the 21st century that were born during the time of Darwin. So, you know, those animals do live well over 150 years, but not sea turtles.
Would you look at that? Filthy. Absolutely filthy. That's all thanks to you, kid. You made it possible.
So this is another instance of a dead fish. Filters do way more than just filter out physical dirt and filth. What filters do is they take care of waste products given off by fish. So when he says,
Don't you people realize we are swimming in our own?
He actually is kind of telling the truth. Fish give off a lot of waste, mostly ammonia. And ammonia is invisible, so we wouldn't see it. It's not the green algae and muck that you see in the tank. But what it is a very toxic substance that would kill the fish. You know, it's more than just them being dirty. This is something that actually would kill a fish, and that's why aquarium keepers need to have a working filter hooked up to each and every tank.
Oh, look, krill!
So this one's a little weird. There's no reason to believe that, you know, a blue whale couldn't accidentally swallow small fish when it filter feeds, but it wouldn't just keep them in its mouth. How blue whales feed is they basically scoop up in their mouths a whole bunch of seawater containing usually schools of krill. They eat almost exclusively krill. And then they use those real hair-like fibers coming from their mouth, which is called baleen, to sort of strain out the water as they push it out of their mouths. Usually they kind of breach the surface and expel it out. And then the baleen will trap all the little krill in their mouth, and then they just swallow it down. Because their mouths are so big and they kind of, you know, just strain the whole water, there's no reason they couldn't catch a very small fish like a clownfish or a blue tang, but it would swallow it. This is another dead marlin and dead dory.
Ah! Too loud for me!
Twinkle, twinkle, little star.
Find a happy place, find a happy place, find a happy place!
So I've worked in zoos before, and I'm just going to tell you guys this. Please do not let your kids bang on the glass. Banging on the glass doesn't get them to move. It doesn't get them to do something cool. All it does is just stress them out. And, you know, the keepers aren't allowed to hit your kids when they do that, but they really, really want to. So please, if you see your kid doing that, just smack them upside the head, yank them away from the glass. Just don't let them do that. Just be a decent person. Come on, guys. You know, anyone who's been fishing and ever caught a fish on a line can probably tell you that a fish that's fairly small can put up a surprisingly strong fight and pull surprisingly hard. So while I'm sure that these fishing nets are meant to take the weight of fish struggling, I don't know, maybe an intelligent, coordinated, concentrated effort of all the fish swimming in the same direction could snap a fishing net, or, you know, even capsize a boat. I don't know. Or maybe just pull the fish up and they all die.
Now what?
And last but not least, the tank gang. Again, that's some dead fish. They have no way of getting out of the bags, and so they would likely just die of either asphyxiation or ammonia buildup pretty quickly. When fish breathe, they take water through their gills and they extract oxygen in the water, and that's what they respirate with. So with a very small container like that, like a bag, they would run out of oxygen in the water very quickly. If not, then they would just build up ammonia. So either way, that's some dead fish. Alright, so that was Finding Nemo. It had some inaccuracies, it had some incorrect information, but it's still a solid movie. Definitely one of Pixar's best. Definitely a great introduction to marine biology and the underwater world. There is a lot of stuff that, I didn't mention, or even stuff that I did mention, that was pretty spot on, that was pretty accurate. And even all the fish models and all the designs of the animals are still fairly close, unlike certain 3D animated fish movies. So even though I make fun of it, I still love it. It's still one of my favorite movies, and I still highly recommend it to anyone who wants to get their kids excited about marine biology. If you like this video, if you want to see more of them, maybe even turn this into a series, please like this video, please leave a comment, please subscribe. If you want to check out more of my content, check out this link to my real documentaries of me out in the wild, including one where I'm scuba diving the Mesoamerican Barrier Reef off the coast of Belize. Absolutely incredible time. Hope you guys liked it, and as always, stay incredible.